What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco. If you start a podcast, you know not everybody is going to agree with what you say on that podcast. People might call you things such as scumbag, and as someone who has been called a lot of things, including scumbag, I'd like to nominate another person here in the Bay as somebody who I consider to be more deserving of that title. And that person is Manny Yekutiel of Manny's in the Mission. If you don't know Manny, he is the gay Zionist burner and gentrification wizard who named his cafe at 16th and Valencia Streets after himself. Earlier this month, he emceed the fundraiser for Kamala Harris. He also recently hosted Canadian Tupac fan and Peter Thiel acolyte Gary Tan. And I'll always remember Manny for hosting the fallen crypto king from Stanford, Sam Bankman-Fried, shortly before Sam was arrested in the Bahamas. Manny was in Israel in October, and he had a direct line to all of the traditional corporate media here in the Bay, who gave him plenty of airtime to explain why the U.S. should send more weapons to Israel during the genocide. In the spirit of the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, in solidarity with Palestinians, Gay Shame and Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism and others called for a boycott of Manny's back in 2018. And earlier this year, Mama Ganoush, as most of you know, a friend of mine who was just on last week's episode, called for a boycott of the Civic Joy Fund, Manny's brainchild that funds public art using city funding as well as money from Levi's heir Daniel Lurie and the crypto billionaire and number one fan of the police, Chris Larson. What does the Civic Joy Fund do? It basically pays for public art like some of the art on trash cans around San Francisco. And it also pays for bands and drag queens who perform at events to revitalize downtown San Francisco. But the Civic Joy Fund also works as a sort of hush money fund for local artists who, as you can imagine, have to hustle in order to afford living in the Bay. And so the Civic Joy Fund, that is funded by all of these conservative billionaires and fronted by Manny, pays artists to make conservative art that aligns with their conservative values. And when you get a check from these people, if you're an artist, of course, you're going to be less likely to speak out against what these people stand for, which is why people like Mama Ganoush are supporting projects like the Hala Fund to pay artists to create without some of these right-wing strings attached. In honor of Pride Month, we're going to re-release this episode with Deeg about the boycott of Manny's, what it's all about from last year. And as always, if you have it, please go to patreon.com/SadFrancisco, where you'll find all of our past episodes and make a contribution to help us pay for the editing and the distribution of this show. And if you can't do that, consider writing a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Here's Deej. Today, we're going to talk about Manny's. Manny's is a gentrification cafe that is also a Zionist project opened by a gay Zionist named Manny Yekutiel, who was once a fellow with the Zionist organization A Wider Bridge, who has been in the news a lot lately because he was in Palestine in early October. And so he has been trotted out by the local traditional news, and the media has been using his sound bites ad nauseum as a source for stories as the genocide in Palestine continues, in addition to being a fellow of the gay wing of the Brand Israel propaganda project that is funded by the Israeli government. Manny previously also worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign and Forward.us, which is the extremely corny name for the tech lobby group founded by Facebook and Instagram's Mark Zuckerberg, as well as Microsoft chairman Bill Gates. So all of these tech billionaires got together and formed this lobby group for the tech industry so that they could amass wealth and power, supporting campaigns like the Keystone XL pipeline and further militarizing the US-Mexico border wall using some of the tech industry's own software and hardware. And so why start a cafe and name it after yourself? Well, Manny got loaded one year at Burning Man, had an epiphany as you do on the playa, and decided to create a social justice cafe where he could host neoliberal celebrities like the crypto scammer Sam Bankman-Fried. He hosted the people involved in the local school board recall and the Chesapeake recall, and the first doctor herself, Jill Biden, plus local politicians like the 3 ultra-conservative gay supervisors on the SF Board of Supervisors. And his pedigree led to him being immediately assigned to positions in local politics. London Breed appointed him to the SFMTA board. London Breed, of course, left San Francisco in the wake of Banko Brown's murder earlier this year to spend the Nakba 2023 in Israel for a vacation. Nakba is the Arabic word for catastrophe, and the yearly Nakba commemoration recognizes Israel's coordinated campaign of terror in which Israelis drove Palestinians from their homes leading up to the creation of Israel in 1948. Hundreds of Palestinian villages were destroyed during the Nakba, and it's part of why hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, and many ended up in refugee camps. And their descendants are still there 3 generations later. Manny has since left the SFMTA board. The boycott was something that was joined by Mothers on the March, which gathers at San Francisco Police and Sheriff's headquarters to express outrage, mourn, and bring attention to local youths killed by law enforcement officers, as well as the Palestinian liberation-focused Palestinian Youth Movement. Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, the Latinx-led Black and Brown Social Club, and the Brown Berets, as well as the Oakland chapter of Critical Resistance. The boycott has led to speakers canceling planned events, including labor organizer Ai-jen Poo of Domestic Workers Alliance and radio/podcast host from the East Bay, Davey D. Of course, Manny had to address at multiple points the existence of the protesters right outside of his cafe. He called us things like the alt-left, trying to equate protesters of his cafe with white supremacists that have literally killed anti-racist activists. Teacher Margot Goldstein and lawyer Rachel Letterman described Manny's anti-Arab racism and rejected Manny's description of Israel as a, quote, feisty liberal democracy in a despotic neighborhood, the ecological rescue of a once barren land. Goldstein and Letterman went on to write in this piece for the Chronicle, the boycott of Manny's is supported by the mission's social justice community because both gentrification and Zionism require and result in the forced displacement of long-standing communities from their homes for the sake of profit and indigenous peoples from their land for the sake of power. And so we will be talking to Deeg of Quit, Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, who also is a member of Gay Shame, about why we called for the boycott of Manny's, and every Wednesday for a long time, we were protesting outside Manny's quote-unquote social justice cafe. And then we'll also talk a little bit about pinkwashing, which is using queerness to cover atrocities by Israel. And in general, how the public relations campaigns of Israel and the lies that come along with that are disseminated here in San Francisco by people like Manny.
There are 2 reasons for the boycott of Manny's. The first is that it's a gentrifying business in an area that is under a lot of gentrification pressure. A lot of techies have moved into that area of the mission. We have, Google buses picking people up and taking them to work. I mean, now people are working from home and that's not happening as much. But at the time of Manny's, when Manny's opened in 2018, that was very, it was right there at ground zero pretty much for gentrification in San Francisco. And it's occupying a kind of rare retail space in this group of buildings that is owned by Mission Housing and is supposed to be providing low-income housing for people. That's part of it. And the other part of it is that Manny set that place up and established himself as basically the arbiter of discussion in our communities. This is where progressive discussion is going to happen, and I'm going to decide who engages in it. So I'm going to have liberal Zionists say that it's okay to criticize certain things about Israel, but I'm not going to have people say the state of Israel was based on a racist idea, and that racist idea has to go away, that we need to have a democratic secular state. We need a state where everybody has rights. And so that's not going to be part of the discussion at Manning's. And he's doing that not just with Zionism. He's doing that with all kinds of other movements. Like he's got a kind of sort of liberal democratic ideology. I wouldn't say he's like far to the left in the Democratic Party, but that's that, so he has these mainstream Democrats going through. He has all of these people going through. He himself worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign, right? So that's
right.
The guy he is. So he's trying to set up Manny's as this is the cool place for discussion, and these are I decide the parameters of that discussion.
Right.
And that's kind of dangerous.
As you mentioned, Quit has been around for 20 some years.
Yeah. 22 years, maybe.
22 years. Could you walk us through a couple of the actions that you all have done?
Well, we've been part of some of the national boycotts. So we did actions in support of, most recently, the Pillsbury boycott, which actually succeeded. Did an action on Starbucks, an action against Starbucks, who did pull out of the occupied territories. HP, we've joined in the actions about HP. So there are those boycotts who are actual and true boycotts. And also supporting the call for people not to go to Israel, for performers and people like that not to go to Israel. And then we've done they're more aimed at raising consciousness. So for a couple of years, we did this boycott of Estee Slaughter based on Estee Lauder and this man, Ron Lauder, who was their president, or anyway, their chief executive guy, who was also a really right-wing Zionist. We handed out various samples and flyers and everything, or encouraging people with these Estee Slaughter samples and perfume samples and things like that. And along those same lines, we also did one on Victoria's Secret, who was making product made with allegedly Egyptian cotton, but they were being made in the occupied territories. We did a fashion show where people were wearing these weird underwear bra things and stuff like that at the Folsom Street Fair. And we had this catalog of fake products of Victoria's Secret. They were not really aimed at developing a economic boycott per se, but using these products and stuff to raise consciousness around the situation in Palestine.
Yeah, and that's generally one of the big parts of a boycott, and why I think you have a lot of forces that want to see Israel exterminate every Palestinian so worried about boycotts.
There have been bills, there have been laws and bills introduced in Congress, introduced in the California state legislature, kind of the way that there are these organizations who push other right-wing bills, and all the state legislatures push the same bill. They've been pushing these bills against boycotting Israel, to say that calling for a boycott of Israel is illegal. They've succeeded in passing bills, but the people who deal with lobbying from our side have gotten them reduced to not anything. So far they haven't succeeded in getting the bill passed. It is really hard to make an economic impact with individuals with boycotts. I mean, what has really happened is there's been boycotts done on institutional levels. Some of the churches have done various boycotts. A couple of unions have done boycotts or have endorsed boycotts. And, there's a call for sanctions, and obviously, and for divestment from Israel. And those obviously would have more of an economic impact than my not buying an HP printer. The once in every 10 years I might buy a printer. Boycotts are largely consciousness raising, but they can have an impact. They aren't going to have an impact when the United States gives $10 billion to Israel.
However, I mean, on the local level, there is a potential to have an impact.
Right.
So Manny's. Could you describe, please, Manny, for people who do not know? Emmanuel Yekutiel.
Well, so back before the pandemic, Manny got a big retail space at 16th and Mission, which is kind of contested territory in terms of gentrification. It's kind of a center for gentrification in San Francisco and has been for a really long time, with the people who are against gentrification pretty much losing.
Yeah, and it's also a building that is owned by Mission Housing, a nonprofit specifically for low-income housing. And so that's just another layer of the gentrification point, I think, that people were trying to make with this boycott.
Right, because this is not something that is of the people who are living in the SROs that are owned by Mission Housing. You know, who they are drawing into the neighborhood. It's just fake grassroots. That's all it is. Eventually, because of our boycott and the publicity we got, because we called for a boycott of Manny's when it opened and said, you know, this is what he's doing. He's trying to create this space, and he is defining the parameters of community discussion with this space. It's not going to be anti-Zionist, and he's going to pick and choose from everybody. And he ended up being a place where various Democratic Party politicians who were running for president, you know, had events, including Pete Buttigieg. So he was trying to establish himself as kind of a force. Like he's going to make or break people in terms of city politics and in terms of how the city relates to national politics or international politics. So he did have a program after Gay Shame initiated a boycott, Quit joined in, a number of other groups joined in, and of Manny's on the basis that he was both a gentrifier and a Zionist, which if you look at it, they're both kind of forms of occupation. He did a program that was like, is being against Israel anti-Semitic? And he had some people who were saying, it's okay to criticize Israel, not being against, but is it criticizing Israel anti-Semitic? And that was kind of what the point of this panel was. And yeah, it's okay to criticize some things about Israel, but it is not okay to criticize Israel as a Zionist entity that is on land that has been taken by force with the support of the imperialist powers from the people who are living there, who have now been turned into one of the largest. They used to be the largest group of refugees until the whole world became refugees. There's still like millions of Palestinians displaced from their lands who never got their lands back, who were driven off their land by a campaign of ethnic cleansing or violence that was done by groups like the Irgun, who were like total terrorists.
You came to town, this sort of beltway political operator person who had come from the Hillary and Obama campaigns and then became a Wider Bridge fellow. So talk a little bit about what you know about a Wider Bridge.
Wider Bridge, which has at least a queer component to it, it's kind of the liberal Zionist approach. Wider Bridge people were involved. I don't know if the organization had formed yet, but there was World Pride organized for Israel and for Jerusalem in 2005 and 6. So it got canceled because Israel invaded Lebanon. So they had to put it off a year. Wider Bridge is that kind of a thing, like we are queer, and it's a wider bridge. We can all be involved in supporting Israel and feel good about it. Quit picketed outside a couple of Wider Bridge events. There was a big dance. It's a problem because it's this sales thing. There was a year when they were building towards World Pride when they handed out like tens of thousands of DVDs of dancing queer people in Israel and giving this image of like, it is really cool to be queer in Israel. Of course, sometimes it isn't really cool to be queer in Israel, and it certainly isn't cool to be a queer Palestinian in Israel. You know, putting out this kind of image, you know.
Right, the pinkwashing conceptual way that the Israeli government is funding a sort of cultural propaganda campaign, giving it like a veneer of being this little oasis for queer people.
Yeah, Quit started the anti-pinkwashing campaign as part of the work we were doing around World Pride and stuff. Yeah, so it's really important. I think a lot of queer groups have gotten on with that and said, you know what, not in our name. If you're oppressing Palestinians, you're not helping us, because queer people are among all populations, and in any case, all oppression hurts everybody. So I think queer people around the country really responded to this whole pinkwashing campaign and said, nope, not doing it. So I don't know that it had the effect that it did. And it's interesting that we're not seeing that much in the last couple of years of this pinkwashing coming out from like the Israeli consulate in San Francisco. One of the things that Quit did for many, many years was to try to get Frameline to go in with the cultural boycott of Israel and not to show Israeli films.
Right.
And
so Frameline's like the big LGBT film festival in San Francisco every year.
The consulate for a while was sponsoring certain films at the festival, and they would fly in like the filmmaker who made Yossi and Jagger, and people like that. They'd fly them in so they could have like a discussion after the film, that kind of, special program and stuff. So we were trying to get Frameline to stop doing that, to stop showcasing and having Israeli films, particularly those who are sponsored by the Israeli government. And they kind of did stop doing it, even though they refused to go along with us. They kind of did stop doing it after a while. But we did a lot of actions outside of the theater.
Yeah, usually on opening nights. And then I know that you all had some filmmakers that signed on to the boycott as well.
We did the Outside the Frame Festival as a counter to Frameline.
Right, the Outside the Frame Film Festival in the Mission.
And we got a lot of people who participated in it. It was pretty great. We had never organized a film festival before.
And although Outside the Frame is not going to be happening this year, there is the Queer Cinema for Palestine Film Festival at the end of November. Actions and film festivals and zines and stickers and conversations like this one are all just ways of raising this issue, and we will keep finding new ways of raising the issue until the genocide is over, until Palestine is free. Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco, which is produced by Toshio Moronic and edited by Tofu Estolas. If you have it, please throw us a few dollars through patreon.com/sadfrancisco, which will help us pay for podcast hosting, editing, and transcriptions for the show. See you next time in Sad Francisco.